trăim noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И надо ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ, нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern Gymnastik ist. Rein all in der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein ein in der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Sretna pod słońcem, rasti u jaslama dzieci, rasti i cvjetaj zemljo radnih ljudi, i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvom rudaru i tvome rataru, mir graditelju i tvom čuvaru, mir tvojoj sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Pieta простяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 3rd of January 2026, and here we are with a very special emergency live stream dealing with the events in Venezuela. Now, I will begin by saying this. How many more times must this happen? How many more times must we go through this process of pretending that there is a peaceful, a moderate, a slow burning transformation that can lead to socialism, especially when it is right in imperialism's backyard? It is a miracle and a testament, in fact, to the strength of the Venezuelan masses that the Bolivarian experiment survived for as long as it has. And it is by no means over yet. We will come to that later. But the brute violence, trickery, chicanery, and corruption of imperialism makes it absolutely clear that any attempt at a transition to socialism that does not involve the elimination of the power of the domestic bourgeoisie is doomed to end in the similar manner to the rather ignominious fall of Nicolas Maduro, or the violent destruction of the government of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, and countless others over and over and over again, not just in South America, not just in the Caribbean, but all over the world. One of the most pernicious and persistent failures of not just South Americans, not just Latin America, not just Europeans, but we are, of course, the people who invented this. One of the most persistent failures is the complete inability to understand the nature of the bourgeois state, and the complete inability to realize amongst so many people all over the world that you cannot reform this state, no matter how many additional things you stick onto it. And no matter how much the masses are behind you, if you leave two things in place, if you leave the domestic bourgeoisie in place, which for all the genuine achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution, the domestic bourgeoisie in Venezuela remained in place and remained free to plot and to scheme and to plan their selling out of the country to US imperialism. And if you leave the bourgeois state in place, eventually it will destroy you, just as it has seen the betrayal and the selling of Nicolas Maduro into the captivity of US imperialism. This is what happens when the laws of history are not respected. And I say that they are the laws of history because we have tested this case over and over and over again. We have seen how imperialism responds to moderate plans for reform, or moderate democratic plans for a slow motion socialist transformation in any area of the world, never mind the area of the world that they regard as their own. Trump, if nothing else about him, you can say this is admirable, has made it absolutely and completely clear that the US regards South America, Central America, and the Caribbean as their own personal possession, that they will decide who runs it, that they will chase out of power anybody who does not please them, that they will unleash all kinds of violence, both physical and economic, against any government that does not completely dance to their tune, and they will not hesitate to use whatever forces they can muster to destroy any movement, politician, or trade union that gets in their way. So how many more times must this lesson be learned? Apparently, it hasn't been learned enough as yet, because what happened in Venezuela last night, unfortunately, is testament to the fact that yet again, a socialist movement has underestimated two things: the ruthlessness of US imperialism, but also the level of treachery that exists in any country that is besieged by imperialism, in any country that is the target of imperialism. That the US imperialists, the British imperialists, the French, the Germans, all of the imperialist powers, but especially the US, will work overtime to buy off or subordinate or subvert the system through the purchasing of the services of internal traitors. And if you are not equipped to deal with these internal traitors and ruthlessly suppress them, then you will end up either on a show trial in a US courtroom, and we'll get to the question of what happens to Maduro in just a moment, or you will end up dead. For years and years, I've had to listen to, as many of you watching this have had to listen to, the pious and tedious lectures of the Western left crying and wailing about Stalinism, about purges, about the Cheka and the NKVD, about the suppression of the military conspiracy by the Soviets in the 1930s, about the fate of that miserable creep Trotsky, about all of this repression, which we were told over and over again by the Western leftists was the reason why the working class turned its back on socialism. Well, we also had to listen to them about the awful repressive nature of North Korea and why this is a horrible disgrace to socialism. But it turns out that the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Lenin and Stalin, the North Korean leadership, really since the revolution in the DPRK began all the way back in the 1940s, understood the situation and understood the necessary internal regime that needed to be put in place to secure the revolution, which was the suppression of the domestic bourgeoisie. The Bolsheviks did this straight away. The removal of their power by taking their land, taking their factories, taking the banks off them, taking their money, and leaving them with a choice: either serve the new order or get out. Most of them chose, of course, to get out. And if they attempt to come back, then suppress them and their agents as ruthlessly as possible, over and over and over again. And this is part of the reason why the DPRK survived when the Soviet Union succumbed to counter-revolution, because not only was it the case that they kept in place the dictatorship of the proletariat, that they ruthlessly suppressed any attempt to bring back capitalism, that they routinely purged traitors from the party hierarchy, but it is also the case that they got the internal system correct. They made the dictatorship of those who make the dictatorship of the proletariat into a real and evolving entity will be able to withstand the pressures of US imperialism. You could say the same about Cuba as well, to an extent. Every single US president since Eisenhower has tried to do in Cuba some version of what Trump did yesterday, or this morning, I should say, in Venezuela. They tried to kill Castro, they tried to poison Castro, they tried to kidnap Castro, tried all manner of things, and all of it failed. Why? Because the US's foothold in Cuba was seriously damaged, if not completely destroyed, by the removal of the power of the Cuban bourgeoisie in the early years of the Cuban Revolution, and the fact that that bourgeoisie was not allowed to return. The problem in Venezuela, as far as I can see at this time, lay in two things. One, that the bourgeoisie was left in place, including some of the worst compradors were allowed to operate openly. They were allowed to, there were still NGO men running around in Venezuela operating openly. So far from Maduro being this ruthless Stalin-like dictator, if anything, Maduro was operating, I would say, like a naive social democrat, because they were allowing the enemies of the Bolivarian Revolution to still operate inside Venezuela. If you check out the Twitter profile of a gentleman by the name of Angelo Giuliano, he's an Italian chap who's lived for a long time in China. He's been reporting live from Venezuela. And he, along with others, have testified to the fact that the US agents were pretty much openly running around. They were operating out in the open. So far from this being this ruthless dictatorship, if anything, this was displaying all the naivety of the worst kind that is displayed by sincere but flawed social democrats. So this is the problem. And it's not just Maduro that's the problem. It's the problem with a lot of like the South American left. Petro in Colombia is no better. In fact, he's considerably worse. The Chilean left under the wretched leadership of Boric, same thing. These people are all infected with the worst kind of, shall we say, bourgeois parliamentarist prejudices. The Venezuelans were the most radical. Out of all those governments that used to be called the Pink Tide, the Venezuelans were the most radical because it had this working class movement at its base that was through the popular assemblies in the working class areas of Caracas and other cities, was carrying out a large degree of self-management and was going around the, shall we say, the structures of the bourgeois state. But of course, the bourgeois state was still there. And so the fact that you had this mass base in support of Bolivarianism that was able to be mobilized in support of Chavez to overcome the 2002 coup. And the difference, by the way, between the 2002 coup and this one was that the US played it a lot smarter in some respects. It wasn't the domestic compradors who seized Maduro, because this is what happened in 2002. It was the domestic enemies led by a man who I believe was called Toledo, who seized Chavez and imprisoned him. And so when the masses came into the streets, they stood a good chance of having Chavez return to them because of the fear that they could put into the domestic comprador regime that was trying to take over in 2002. The US didn't take that chance this time round. What they did was they seized Maduro in the night at his home without firing a shot and whisked him away, stuck him on a US naval vessel, and are taking him to the United States. They're not taking the chance of leaving him in place, which means, unfortunately, that the reason why Maduro was left apparently unguarded against this US raid, and it was just a raid. There was they did some strikes on Venezuelan military bases, but in reality there was there was some anti-aircraft fire, but there was little resistance because, in actual fact, other than for a couple of hours, nothing else happened. They went in. The power in Caracas apparently went off around about the time they seized Maduro. So the US apparently at least had the ability to turn off the power to the capital city. So again, that points to more internal collaborators. Seized the president at his home. So where the hell was the president's security is an interesting question. Then get him out of the country without suffering a single casualty. That points to the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan military being massively compromised by internal traitors. So the question then comes up, which is, well, what happens now? And we'll get to that in just a moment. But on the question of internal traitors, this brings us back to the necessity of the dictatorship of the proletariat, the necessity of the hunting down in the internal traitors, because to turn off the capital city's power supply, to find the location of the president, and according to Trump, and I don't think he's lying about this, have an exact replica of the president's house down to the last detail for this special operations group to train in, well, then that's a lot of human intelligence they're getting out of Venezuela. So somebody's giving them that. Somebody gave them Maduro's location. Somebody made sure he was guarded. Somebody made sure nobody fired a shot at this US force when it went in. So somebody's done some kind of revolting deal with the Trump administration. The question is who? And the question for the Venezuelan masses is, well, what happens now? Because nominally power transfers to Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who was on a visit in Moscow at the time of this raid. So the first question is, well, is she going to be able to return to Venezuela? Trump says that he's had a conversation with her and they can do business. Quite what that means, I'm not sure. Now, the question then is, well, how do the Venezuelan masses respond? Because in fairness to Maduro, he was doing some of the right things before they took him, which is that he was arming the masses. He was making sure that the civilian militia got military equipment and started receiving training in order to resist a potential US invasion. Now, I said before this happened, in fact, when Trump started blowing up fishermen in the Caribbean and claiming it was about drugs, by the way, he's dropped all of that now. And now it's just he's being more honest. It's about seizing the oil. Now, the question of how this happened, and the question of like, well, what happens now? We will get to that. But first of all, to complete the thought about the Venezuelan masses, they are now left in a position where not only is it the case that their leadership has been decapitated, seized in the night by the US imperialists, but they are faced with a situation where they clearly have a lot of internal traitors at the very top of either the military, the intelligence establishment, or the political establishment in Venezuela, because it had to be some pretty powerful people involved to withdraw the president's security and to basically leave him open to this US raid, because it wasn't, the US didn't actually send in many men. And this is how the US prefers to fight its wars. The US over the last 30 years has not liked to fight wars that lead to a risk of high casualties. All the way back in 2001, over 20 years ago now, when they first occupied Afghanistan, they managed to do that not by sending in like a huge invasion force at first, but by buying off various different warlords to switch sides and turn against the Taliban. That's how they got it. Iraq in 2003, just after the invasion, the US general in charge, Tommy Franks, gave an interview in which he confirmed that the US suffered as fewer casualties as it did in that initial invasion. Why? Because they managed to pay off a large number of Iraqi generals to simply stand down and not fight when the US and Britain launched their invasion of Iraq in 2003. Same is true for Libya in 2011, and the same was true for Syria just the other year. They paid off large sections of the state. They found the corrupt people. They found the people willing to take a bribe. They found the people who were willing to turn on the system in return for a payout. And they managed to subordinate them and managed to use them against the government that they wanted to destroy. And that points us back again to the reason why you need to continually hunt down and suppress, imprison, or execute for treason in some cases, the various characters who the US and the British and the French and the Germans have taken onto their payroll. This is why, by the way, the Chinese have had an ongoing purge of their party and state for over a decade, ever since the changeover of power to the current President and General Secretary Xi Jinping. They previously found that they had become riddled with these people inside China itself. And as we've said over and over and over again on this channel, this is how the US and the British operate. They don't like to engage themselves in the high casualty wars, because if the US had tried to directly invade Venezuela, take Caracas and the rest of the country, or even just the major cities, it would have led to huge, potentially very large US casualties. And Trump doesn't want any part of that action. So this is how they operate. They find people in the right positions to be able to swing things in the direction the imperialists want, and they bring them over to their side. This, by the way, is what the imperialists, including the Nazis, were trying to do against the Soviet Union back in the 1930s. They were trying to find people inside the Soviet hierarchy who were willing to switch sides and who were willing to sell out the revolution. That's what they were doing. They were trying to find military conspirators like the wretched Tukhachevsky, old friend of Trotsky's, who became pro-Nazi. They were trying to find people in the hierarchy of the Communist Party. They were trying to find people in the hierarchy of the state who would be prepared to switch sides. Ultimately, many years later, when the revisionists had dropped the dictatorship of the proletariat, after many years of corruption, the imperialists found their people inside the Soviet Party. And ultimately, they got their way with Gorbachev leading the way and then Yeltsin finishing the job. And that's the point about the need for a correct internal regime with socialism, because the reason why the Soviet Union was able to withstand all conspiracies that were drawn against it by the British, by the French, by the Nazis, by also the United States in the 30s was because it did operate the dictatorship of the proletariat, because the masses had become the ruling class, because the masses were consistently mobilized in defense of the revolution, because they had a system to ruthlessly suppress the enemies of the revolution. And that is what the trials of the so-called old Bolsheviks were about. That's what the trials of the military conspirators were about. And it is because of that they were able to withstand the real brute force of the Nazis after 1941. Now, that's the reality here. Unless you're prepared to do something like that, unless you're prepared to hunt down these traitors. And in fairness to the Cubans, it looks like they have a pretty efficient system for doing it as well, given the failure of almost all of the US attempts to do this to Cuba. Because the US can't fight invasions where there will be mass casualties of US forces. That much is absolutely clear now. They retreated from Iraq when they started to take significant casualties. They retreated from Afghanistan because they weren't willing to take the level of casualties that it would have taken to suppress the Taliban. They weren't willing to take that hit. And they weren't willing to launch a full invasion of Venezuela. They don't even have the capability to do it. So they got what they wanted via intelligence work and via corruption and via internal treachery. And that's why you not only need an internal regime that can mobilize the masses in the defense of the revolution, but you need a Cheka, you need an NKVD, you need a Stasi. In combination with that, you need a proletarian dictatorship. You need a powerful state that can hunt down and destroy the conspiracies and attempts at subversion, inevitably that are going to be launched by the imperialists against you. This is the way in which things do need to go. So this is clearly a setback. It is clearly something which is going to have an impact, a negative impact. But the other thing that I should emphasize is that what has been done over the past 25 plus years, over a quarter of a century, that the Bolivarian Revolution has been unfolding, the positive achievements of it and the change in the consciousness of the masses who are the most revolutionary elements there, they are, of course, not going to be undone anytime soon. The US might, and indeed undoubtedly has, bought itself the services of some military officials, maybe some politicians, maybe some people from the intelligence services. That much is clear. But they are unable to buy off the Venezuelan revolutionary masses. And it is upon the masses that things now do depend. Because the truth about Maduro's abduction and who was behind it inside Venezuela will emerge over the next few days. The truth as to who the Americans paid off. I even would expect Trump to come out and say who they paid off, because that's just the nature of who he is. But there is now a real struggle in play in Venezuela itself, because the way in which this was done means that the US doesn't actually have any forces on the ground to any significant degree in Venezuela, and Trump now says he can do business with the Venezuelan vice president. That means that if the masses in Venezuela can mobilize in defense of the real achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution, then it means that they can actually shift things back onto a revolutionary course now. But it must be a revolutionary course, because it's clear now that what leaving the Venezuelan bourgeois, who are completely rotten in place, leads to. It's clear now what not hunting down the enemies of the revolution leads to. It leads to the US imperialists being able to do what they did last night. And whereas they will always try to do terrorist attacks, they will always try to subvert any country that deviates from their order. But there are things that can be done to prevent this. But it involves being ruthless in defense of the revolution and being prepared to take the hit to your reputation, being prepared to be criticized and demonized by the entire Western world, including the Western left, who, of course, have repeatedly denounced both Chavez and Maduro as terrible dictators over the years. But it means basically being prepared to ruthlessly defend the process of socialist transformation, and to do so because to do so and to be prepared to take the action needed. Because if you're not, then you're condemning the working class and peasantry to immiseration under a comprador bourgeois regime, which is what they will try to impose in Venezuela now. So I can only hope that the Venezuelan masses can get out there and mobilize, and also find themselves new leadership, because new leadership now needs to arise, because it's quite plain that the government of which Maduro was the head has failed. Your head of state doesn't get lifted in the middle of the night without firing a shot, without a shot being fired, where your state doesn't get that infiltrated by the enemy, who's not even pretending that he's not your enemy anymore. Your state doesn't get infiltrated that much without there being some very serious failures. But I have every faith that there are many in the masses of the Venezuelan population. There are many out there who will want to fight for socialism, who will want to resist this attempt to return Venezuela to comprador rule. And we in the West, if we are to do anything to support them, must back their actions as they mobilize in the days to come. And we must back them in their fight to retain their independence and to retain their revolutionary process that still is in place now. The revolutionary process in Venezuela didn't just depend on Maduro, just as it didn't just depend on Chavez. It can be preserved, but only if the masses now take to the scene in a way that is on at least a level of the movement against the coup in 2002. But we'll need to go beyond that. It will need to go beyond that, and it will need to ruthlessly suppress the bourgeoisie and root out the enemies of the revolution in Venezuela itself, including those in the PSUV, in the Venezuelan military hierarchy, and in the state machine. Because it's clear there's a lot of traitors in there that need to be removed if the progress that the masses have made since the first coming to power of Chavez all the way back at the end of the 1990s is to be retained. We can only hope that they succeed, and we, in whatever small way that we can, send our solidarity to them in this vital hour where they are facing a horde of enemies, but most dangerously the domestic enemy, which is always the more dangerous enemy even than imperialism itself. Because without its own agents, without the traitors, the US could not have done what it did last night. Now, moving on to the question of what happens to Maduro. Is Maduro going to see trial? I saw that Comrade Jason in the question in the comments was asking that question. I really don't think that the Trump administration is going to stick Maduro on trial in the Southern District of New York, because if they put him on trial in a civilian court in the United States, then what is going to happen is he'll have to have access to a defense attorney. He'll have to have the American government will have to unveil its case against him, and its case is bullshit. It'll have to reveal the evidence that they have against him, and the evidence will be obvious bullshit. So Maduro will not see trial. I am convinced of that. And what then happens is an interesting question. Does Trump then go to something like a closed military tribunal, where there's no evidence presented in public, where they basically deal with Maduro as they tried to deal with like the so-called Al-Qaeda suspects that were brought to the US 20 years ago? Maybe, but that would also attract an awful lot of negative attention. My guess would be one of two things will happen. Either the US will just detain Maduro indefinitely and basically give the middle finger to anybody who asks them any questions, or Maduro will be held incommunicado and then eventually get, shall we say, Epsteined. There is a third option, though, which is that they will essentially trade Maduro and his wife, who's of course was with him, who was taken with him, to like the Russians or the Chinese. They will send him into exile. That's the third option. My worry is that what they'll do is they'll just use administrative detention and place him in some sort of weird, through using some weird legal loophole, just keep him as a prisoner of war or a non-combatant or one of the other myriad legal precedents the Bush administration set 20 years ago. So I don't think he will ever see trial. It is too risky for the US to present the so-called evidence that they have against him. It will be a farce. It will be a clown show. So I would never expect Maduro to actually see the inside of a courtroom, beyond merely appearing once to confirm his name or something. The trial that is expected just will never come. Now, other question comes up, which is what role does all of this play in the wider US strategy with regard to Latin America? Now, I have said before many times that there is a risk of the US doing a similar kind of operation to this in Mexico. They've been talking about it for many, many years now. They've been floating this narrative out there that the Mexican state is run by cartels. Cartels are terrorist organizations. Trump has indeed said that. And that therefore the US needs to take military action in order to actually secure itself from attacks by these cartel organizations. Now, never mind, of course, that the cartels in Mexico are, if indeed they are organizations like the US says they are at all, have the individuals in them have a long history of collaboration with the US intelligence services. The US state has a long history of selling arms to these cartels under the excuse that they were going to use it as a bust. Remember, this is a scandal that erupted back in the Obama years. And it is clear that the US imperialists, and this would have happened regardless of whether Harris won the election or Biden's corpse was still in the White House or Trump is there. The US ruling class does not regard it as acceptable that the Morena government remains in place. They are absolutely going to try something here. And now the success so far of what they've done in Venezuela will undoubtedly go to their heads. Trump at his rambling press conference was talking about Mexico in the same manner. So we can expect an assault on Mexico of some kind. Now, whether that will be a direct attack by the US, I don't know, but we should draw some lessons from what has happened in Venezuela, which is that the US really doesn't like to risk mass casualty events. So they will try, I think, and do to Sheinbaum a version of what they've done to Maduro. The first move was an attempted color revolution. They've already tried that in Mexico and it didn't work. The other will be, of course, using the various different, very corrupt Mexican politicians that do exist inside the Mexican system to try and maneuver Sheinbaum out of power in other ways, maybe breaking apart Morena's coalition, maybe making up some scandal about Sheinbaum. All of this is, of course, the kind of dirty business the US and the British excel in. But if they can't get any of that, then there is every chance that they will use their own connections to the cartel organizations to dramatically increase the level of violence inside Mexican society and use that as a pretext for intervention. What is clear is that they will not accept the social democratic government led by Sheinbaum remaining in place. They will not accept that. They will not accept in Central, Southern America, or the Caribbean nations any government which deviates away from being just simply a comprador tool of the United States. That was the message that came out of the US's national security strategy. Nobody who read that can be left in any doubt. Now let's deal with another myth that's been floating around in what I'm going to call like the multipolar moron space, which is that this somehow represents the US engaging in a tactical retreat to just be focused on the Western Hemisphere, or that the US has traded with the Russians and the Chinese, that they can have Venezuela and the Russians can have Ukraine and China can have Taiwan. This is fanciful nonsense. I have said before and will say it again. The US ruling class cannot carry out a retreat from imperialism. Imperialism is the entire system in the United States. It has a foreign element and a domestic element, but they can no more retreat from that than any of us can suddenly defy the laws of gravity. They try and retreat from any of it, and the whole system will start falling to pieces. The taking of Venezuela is merely an opening gambit in a new round of aggression globally. Trump's already talking about selling more arms to Taiwan. The Chinese have made it clear that if Taiwan declares independence, they consider that to be a red line. We can expect the US to continue their provocations everywhere. And remember, the same rule applies all the time, which is the US doesn't like to do the fighting itself, just as the British don't. They don't like to expose themselves to mass casualty events. If they stage a provocation, which they will eventually in Taiwan, they'll aim to get the Taiwanese, Filipinos, and Japanese to do the fighting for them. But stage it, they will. This is something which will happen, just as they are not going to give up the Banderite regime in Ukraine anytime soon. They are not going to just tamely surrender and go back to an earlier version of the US, which isn't imperialist anymore. That is an absolutely fanciful and nonsensical position to take. If they try and withdraw from their globe-spanning imperial commitments, then the profitability of many of the biggest US companies will collapse, leading to a huge domestic crisis. The reason that they're seizing Venezuela is to do to Venezuela ultimately what they're going to do to, or they're already doing to places like Argentina, what they're doing to Bolivia, what they're going to do to Ecuador. They're going to asset strip them all. Now, in Venezuela, there's still a chance that the masses can resist and stop this. But the compradors will be pushing hard to push themselves into power now. So we can only hope that they are stopped. But to finish the point on the US, they will not ever retreat. They will not stop this aggression. The only way they retreat is if they are defeated to a disastrous extent. They were defeated partially in Korea by the heroism of the Koreans, the Chinese, and the Soviets, of course. They were badly defeated in Vietnam, and they've still not got over it. They still can't deploy US forces to do the kind of mass military operations and invasions that they would want to do, ideally, which is why, of course, they resort to trickery, as they have done in the case of Venezuela. So, but the aggression will continue. Like the war in Ukraine will not end because they want to preserve that Banderite regime. They want to preserve it so that they can turn it loose again on the Russians in 5 years' time. The Russians know this. That's why in their defense doctrine, they say that they view the biggest security threat as a NATO military operation being run against them in 4 to 5 years' time. So the aggression won't end. It will never end. The only way that imperialist aggression will be brought to a close is when the ruling classes of the United States, Britain, France, Germany, you can throw in Italy in there as well, but those four in particular are brought down domestically. The only way that US imperialism is going to ever be destroyed is if it's destroyed by the US proletariat internally. It can be defeated outside. The defeats that it suffers can trigger internal crises. But really, the final confrontation that will finally bring US imperialism crashing down must happen within the borders of the continental United States itself. Just as British imperialism can only be destroyed inside the island of Britain itself, inside old perfidious Albion. It can, just as in France, it can only be done by the French, just as in Germany, it can only be done by the Germans. We should stop looking to anybody else marching over the hill to come and save us. Russians aren't doing it. Chinese aren't doing it. Nobody's doing it. If you want to take down imperialism, you have to do it. We have to do it ourselves. There's no other way around it. And final point I'll make here, just on the point that all those weeping and wailing about international law today. International law does not exist. It does not exist. It never did. Was it against international law and various genocide conventions for the US to wage the blood-soaked campaign of mass slaughter it did in Korea? Yeah, it was. But the US got the UN Security Council to say it was legal. Because, you know, if you run the institutions and you write the laws, you can say what's legal. Was it legal for the US to do what it did in Vietnam by the holy and sacred UN Charter? No. Well, they did it anyway. Was it legal to do the mass murder of communists in Indonesia in 1965? No, they did it anyway. Is it legal to do all of the stuff that the US has done over the last 30 years? No, but they did it anyway. Why? Because there is no law. It's a joke. It's why when you see people like, the Russians and the Chinese and President Sheinbaum of Mexico and Jeremy fucking Corbyn going on about international law or international norms, the imperialists just showed you exactly what they think about all of that. They just kidnapped the president of a sovereign country from his fucking bedroom, stuck him on an aircraft carrier, and are now going to imprison him or kill him in the United States. There is no law. The law is whatever the hell they say it is. And if you sit around saying, well, we're going to take you to court, the answer comes back, and the answer's that. For those listening on the audio version of this, it's a middle finger. They don't care. They don't care whether it's a domestic thing. You take them to court, you win the case, then they change the law. If it's an international thing, the US gets to act as global pirate and no one does anything. Well, eventually the Russians and the Chinese are going to be forced to do something because the US is going to come after their shipping in a serious way. So the fact is that this entire system, this idea of, we're going to have this multipolar world based on international law, and it's going to be nice, and the Chinese are going to guarantee it. This is a nonsense. This is a nonsense. US imperialism is not finished yet by quite some distance. It is declining. It is something which is considerably decayed from where it was just a few decades ago. But as you can see, as long as it can move money around, as long as it has its collaborators, as long as it has its intelligence networks, as long as it has the ability to rain down destruction, it's still dangerous. And they are not going to accept losing that primacy in the world, as their own national security strategy made abundantly clear. So everybody needs to stop dreaming and wake the fuck up, because they're not going away. They will work ceaselessly to destroy anybody who stands against them. Now, yes, they are limited by the fact now that they can't deploy mass armies, that they can't sustain mass casualties. So unfortunately, it looks like the only way that you're going to be able to actually defeat them is the same way that the Koreans defeated them, the same way the Vietnamese defeated them, the same way that the Algerians defeated the French. That's the price of liberation. And I'm not surprised that so many people don't want to pay that price, or don't want to think about it, or think that there's a peaceful way to do it. But they've made it absolutely clear that there isn't. You can say this about Trump. I mean, Trump is a creep, a gangster. That's not just hyperbole either. He has very real links to the National Crime Syndicate in the United States. But he does give you the honest truth, which is, we wanted to take Maduro out and we took him out. Now we're going to seize control of the resources of the country. That's the reality. That's what you're dealing with. There's no negotiating with that. There's no compromise with that. And here I'll go back to something that I said back in August when Putin was going to go and meet Trump in Alaska. How can you negotiate with that? How can you negotiate with a power that tears up every agreement you sign with it, that openly gives you the middle finger every time you express an objection, which runs all the international institutions and just gets them to do whatever it wants, which kills people whenever it wants, anybody who gets in the way, which tries to kill you, not openly. They didn't send a bunch of missiles that they flung off a US ship, but they tried very seriously to kill Putin the other day. Now, admittedly, it was probably never going to work, because the Russian air defense inside Russia is actually pretty good, and good enough to shoot down these Ukrainian drones anyway. But how can you negotiate with that? And it's not just a question of Trump. It's a question of every US president. Because even the ones that look like they might be in control aren't in full control. So either Trump is either not in full control of the system, or is fully on board with these like piratical and gangsterish attempts to hijack boats, to kill leaders who get in the way, including the leader of the Russian Federation. How can you negotiate with that? You can't. You can't deal with these people. There's no dealing, there's no negotiating with terrorists, and that is what they are. And so the lesson from this is that it's still the case that too many in Russia and in China still don't understand what they're dealing with here. because it's not a question of Trump or Biden or Democrat or Republican. It's a question of imperialism as a system being this remorseless bloodsucker that will kill anybody that gets in its way, but which is not all powerful. It can be stopped. The 20th century has shown us that it can be stopped. It has shown us the extreme limitations of imperialism, but you have to be, unfortunately, willing to actually go up against it in a serious way, which means, of course, often a hideous cost, because they're willing to kill gargantuan numbers of people to keep themselves at the top of the tree. Same is true for the ruling classes in Britain, Germany, France, Spain, Italy. The history of 20th century fascism shows us just how badly these people will behave when they think like they're going to lose their power. So let's have a realistic appreciation of the horrors of the imperialist system, but let's not have it paralyze us. In the end, Mao's analysis is correct, which is imperialism is a paper tiger because its links with its own masses are very, very weak. But unfortunately, you have to force imperialism out into the open. You have to, if you're under siege, you have to be able to at least defend yourself against it. And that means being able to militarily defeat it. But also it means hunting down and destroying its internal collaborators and ruthlessly suppressing them whenever they rear their ugly heads. Without that, then you cannot win. Right. Okay. So we have, how many watching now? 425 on Rumble and Twitch and on YouTube. We have just going over here onto Substack. Hello to everybody who's watching on Substack, by the way. We have about 47 of you over there. That's good. That's the best we've ever had on the Substack page. And we have 416 watching on X. Excellent. So the thing I'll do now is I'll take a few questions from the comments section. So be sure to drop in any questions that you've got on anything I've just said or any of the developments today. Now, of course, we are dealing with a live situation. We're still not sure exactly what happened with regard to the internal treachery that was clearly evidenced last night, and what is actually happening in Venezuela itself. I will come back to you again tomorrow with further details. Okay, so we got Slammer Jammer on YouTube here saying every failure is another step forward and eventually we'll stop pussyfooting around and do what is necessary. Venezuela either clears house of the bourgeoisie or it's civil war. That is indeed the case. Edward says the bourgeoisie in Venezuela is pushing for full power now. If they don't implement a proletarian dictatorship after this, if they even can now and the compradors don't rule, they are fucked. Well, that's largely true. Edward, it's very kind of you to think that the Venezuelan government would want to hear from me. They know all this. That's the thing, though. Like, you have got to be like brain damaged if you're Venezuelan and you've seen everything that's happened over the past 20 years, and you still think that the US wants to negotiate with you. That's just simply not the case. Like, if you believe that, then there is literally, you're either totally corrupt or you're stupid beyond the point of redemption. Right. CD5 says, whoever will be picked for the new puppet regime were the ones involved in betraying Maduro. Yeah, that's probably the case. SW Haster says, some Chinese are saying this would be the ideal time to force unification with Taiwan because what the US just did with Venezuela. What do I think? I don't think that will happen. Look, the Chinese are still thinking that their economic success will mean that the world will inevitably reshape itself into the global order that they are in favor of. Let's just put it that way. And I don't think for a moment that the Chinese leadership are interested in becoming the next United States. They're not interested in becoming an imperialist power. I really the idea that China is a social imperialist is a non-starter for me. They suffer from, though, this what I would call an overly economically deterministic outlook, believing that if they can just keep offering better terms of trade to the rest of the world and a better world order, that the world will go in their direction. Now, the US has made it abundantly clear that that kind of transition is not going to come as long as the US is able to subvert countries, able to find internal traitors, able to launch terrorist campaigns. They will not stop seeking to sabotage whatever it is that the Chinese are trying to do. So whereas I don't think that the Chinese are suddenly going to turn around and invade Taiwan, what they should do, what I would hope that their leadership would do, was look at what has been done to Venezuela and learn the lesson, which is that no matter how much success the Chinese have economically, no matter how much better in terms of international trade, the deals that the Chinese can offer to various different countries are, if the US feels like it is losing this particular battle, they'll just use every violent means at their disposal to destroy any government the Chinese deal with. Now, of course, the Chinese response will be to try and deal with any government that the US then puts in place, believing that the sheer weight of their economic power will bring over to a cooperative relationship anybody, even those that the US puts in place. Well, this will be proved to be an incorrect calculation, because there will be no move towards a world free of imperialism without a protracted and unfortunately very real struggle against the forces of imperialism and their local collaborators. The idea that this is going to be this drift towards this world based on the real politic of Beijing, this is something which is a fantasy. This is for the birds. Right. Abtin says, in Iran, they had to kill over 200 people and they still failed. In Venezuela, they just grabbed the president and his wife and just fucked off. It's disgraceful. That's true. Now, I've certainly got my criticisms of the Iranian system, but the US has never managed to compromise the security of the supreme leader of Iran, or indeed the president of Iran. They killed a lot of people, but the idea that they could just walk in without a shot being fired against them, seize the head of state and fuck off, that would not happen in Iran. Not even with the Pezeshkian leadership, that would not happen, because of course he doesn't control the military and intelligence apparatus. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, does. But this is why Iran has to be treated more seriously, because whatever problems it has, its leadership still maintain a consistent anti-imperialist stance and have been able to face down a lot of internal coups and external aggression. And if the Israelis, on behalf of the US, fancy having another go, I'm sure it'll end in roughly the same way the last one did, which is disaster for the US side. Alan Smith says, Maduro being allowed to speak publicly would be a PR disaster, which is why he will never be allowed to speak publicly. No matter what, I mean, Trump might fancy the idea of putting a trial on national television, but the more serious people in the intelligence services and the military know that it will be a disaster. He'll be disappeared into a prison somewhere, or some kind of detained on some military base, or possibly, as I said, swapped for somebody else from the Russian or Chinese side, and he'll go into exile. He'll never face a courtroom. Sophia says, this makes me wish Chavez was still the leader of Venezuela. I cannot believe this would have happened while he was in charge. Well, it did happen. I mean, admittedly for only a brief period of time, but the response of the masses back in 2002 brought him back again. Now, I mean, what I need to do with this is I need to go and do a lot more reading about what's happened over the last 10 years and like try and find where this betrayal could have come from. That's a task for me to do. Nehat says they'll make an AI deepfake Maduro next. Well, yes, that's plausible. I wouldn't put it past Trump to put out a deepfake video. To put out a deepfake trial. That's something that he would probably appeal to him. Let's have a look. They will send him to Saudi Arabia or Israel. I doubt it. I doubt it because that would be too on the nose even for them. The chances are they will retain him in the United States under some sort of permanent detention order. Then maybe eventually he'll be allowed to go into exile. Would be my prediction. Yes, and they also blew up Chavez's grave, which is of course just the kind of petty violence that you get from the imperialists. To answer Colombian YLDB backup, I don't think that Scheinbaum is a Zionist. As far as I know, she denounced the actions of the Israeli government with regard to Gaza. So unless I see something more convincing, I don't think that she is a Zionist. And of course, it doesn't matter whether it's Scheinbaum or AMLO or anybody else. It's the Morena party and the process of transformation that AMLO began, Lopez Obrador began, that the US sees as a threat. And it is a threat to their interests if it succeeds. And that's what they want to get rid of. They were talking about this when AMLO was in office. If Scheinbaum serves her time and then is replaced by somebody else who's also from the Morena party, the US will still be trying to do it, still be trying to get rid of the Morena party. But it's not the individuals that are the question. It's the process they've started, that of trying to make Mexico into a more sovereign and independent and economically strong country, and one that isn't just run by a bunch of compradors handpicked by the US. That's what their problem. That's what the problem that they have is. J Galt M4XU says Mexico was specifically named as a target in Project 2025. Yeah, it's been floating around in US national security circles that Mexico is going to be a target for many, 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 many years. Edward says Scheinbaum has no two choices: go radical, capitulate. If she does business as usual, she will be cooed out. The class forces that support her probably means she can't go proletarian dictatorship, and probably theoretical knowledge to lead a proletarian dictatorship, and it's not a suitable cadre. Well, again, I'm going to try and get some interviewees from Mexico on to talk about this. So I'll look further into that. Right, let's have a look further through here. ID Mansour Faus 1810 says, from this event, I can only imagine what they have already prepared militias at the borders with Colombia, Guyana, Curacao, etc. They all have to create havoc, confusion, and mayhem. They will certainly try. They will certainly try. Irish Partisan, hello to you. Says Brian Berletic made this point in his latest post. The US is intensifying its operations around the globe, not withdrawing. Yeah, I mean the idea. I mean Trump says, "I'm the president of peace." If you believe that, then again, like I envy the narcotics that you're on, because that's some very, very powerful hallucinogens that you're taking. Yeah, they've been doubling down everywhere. I mean, just as the Biden administration doubled down everywhere. Like Trump might have talked about, I'm going to do a deal with the Russians. Well, he's not going to do a deal because the only deal that's acceptable to the US political establishment is one that preserves the Kiev regime. And if the Russians agree to the preservation of the Kiev regime, it's only so it can launch aggressions against them again in a few years' time, once the Germans have deported all the Ukrainian men back there, then you'll end up with them having to fight this war all over again. That is designed to prevent any settlement being reached. And Trump, I don't know if he knows that or not, but that's the agenda he's serving. Sid Hatfield says, Donnie has been a pure syndicate man for all his life. He was mentored by syndicate lawyer Roy Cohn, has cavorted with Les Wexner, and was funded by the Sands Miriam Adelson. Yeah, the guy's an organized crime linked creation and always has been. And organized crime is a key element in the, shall we say, the non-visible state inside the United States, as Aaron Good outlines in his book, and as I believe Peter Dale Scott outlined in his work as well. Okay. Mr. Artukas says, it's hard not to be conspiratorial. This is also an indirect attack on China, who has more than 60 billion in investment in infrastructure in their response to US new security paradigm. Indeed. There's no, I don't think it's a coincidence that they struck just immediately after Maduro was talking to a Chinese delegation about like a new massive agreement with the Chinese. If the US gets its way in Venezuela, and we should all hope against hope that they don't, then they won't allow in any competitors. The Chinese and the Russians won't get a look in. They'll be completely removed from Venezuela, and it'll be only American allied businesses that will be allowed to operate there. So yes, it is an indirect attack on China, and I hope that the Chinese leadership recognizes that that is what it is. Exodus says the Dutch government has spent an inordinate amount of apologizing to Suriname and is trying to strengthen ties. I fear that Suriname's close proximity to Venezuela matters. Interesting. Right, what else have we got here? Nemo on Twitter says, I think the US military is too muscle bound. They are bloated and inefficient, too old and frail to do it properly. It will shrink. Well, certainly the US military can't do what it could do 30, 40 years ago. They can still create a lot of destruction, but as was shown from their confrontation with Ansar Allah in the Red Sea, they couldn't defeat them and couldn't chase them out. And again, were unable to do it with following in the previous decade of bombing Yemen via Saudi Arabia. So the US is limited in what it can do. It's just that what they are still good at is sniffing out traitors and recruiting treacherous elements into their service. They're still good at that, even if everything else that they were once proficient at has gone down the pan. Sid says, we may have leadership faster than we think, though, if the bourgeois keeps pushing the proletariat into a corner the way that they are. Well, look, the situation in the United States will turn more positive for revolutionaries. Indeed, it already is. Even if the US manages to get its way and completely asset strip and ransack Venezuela, and let's hope that they don't get that, it won't actually arrest the long-term decline of the US imperialism. That much is clear. They had the ability to asset strip and destroy a huge portion of the world at the beginning of the 90s. But the US imperialist system was in crisis again less than a decade later. The US economy started going downhill after 2000. So even if they do manage to get their way in Venezuela, it won't actually lead to a significant revival of US imperialism as a system, even with all the oil. It will not actually lead to the revived manufacturing base that Trump is looking for. It won't lead to a revival of the American military. If nothing, it'll only speed up the process because suddenly there'll be a giant infusion of cash, which will all disappear into the usual places. What else have we got here? Mike Patrick says the UN Security Council, an organization of American states, will be completely justified to make us literal diplomatic pariahs over this. They won't, but they should. Well, they organizations which the US started will never turn against it. It's like appealing to the IMF, the World Trade Organization, or the World Bank for a judgment against the US. Like, well, how are they going to enforce that judgment? They're not. Fizzywig says, the war in Ukraine is lost because the objective fact that USA cannot win without major military troops following engagement, thus USA resorting to easy targets, or easier targets, shall we say, yes. Yellow Sheep says, China and Russia do help Venezuela economically by providing defensive systems that the Venezuelans have to defend themselves. That is entirely correct. Even in the days of the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union committing to like Cuba's defense, if the Cubans had not been able to defend themselves against internal counter-revolution, there would have been nothing the Soviet Union could have done. You have to get your internal regime correct, and that means the way the state is structured, the way you select personnel for the higher levels, the role of the military, the integration of the masses and the military and the state, the ability to consistently mobilize the masses, the ability to wield an effective security service to suppress internal enemies, and to not have that be destroyed by bureaucracy or imperialist infiltration. All of that is one of the things the Cubans have got consistently correct over the last 70 years. Alexander Lukta says, fun fact, former troops from the Baltics guarded the building during the Nuremberg trials. It was a show trial. They recruited most of the regime for NATO or let them run West Germany. Did you see the Bella 1 painted a Russian flag on an oil tanker that the US Coast Guard wasn't able to board for 2 weeks? Yes. Well, due to the US's piracy efforts in the world, the Russians and the Chinese will be flagging their own ships more with their own flags, far more. They'll stop using third-party countries, like the reason why like tiny places in the world like Liberia or Panama have huge numbers of ships registered there, is because this is a dodge used by various countries. The Russians, in order to protect their shipping, will have to start flagging their ships with Russian flags, and then being able to send naval assets to defend them if the US keeps trying to hijack various oil tankers, and if the British and the French keep attacking Russian shipping. By putting these ships under their own flags and being therefore able to defend them legitimately on the high seas from attempts at US or British or French piracy, that changes the game somewhat. All right. Jenny says they'll never let us win, especially not peacefully. Very true. Why would they? The bourgeoisie themselves didn't come to power peacefully. In Britain, the old feudal power resisted violently for a very long time. And then in the end, the British ruling class ruthlessly suppressed the old feudal power, or bought some of it off and incorporated it into the new system. But they ruthlessly suppressed it. Same is true for the bourgeoisie anywhere they come to power. They very ruthlessly suppressed anybody who's opposed to their dictatorship. We must learn a lesson from them. Right. Edward says Kirill Dmitriev wants to negotiate. He and his traitors would call the US first if Putin died, and would see that as an opportunity to go full comprador. Of course they would. I mean, the comprador faction in Russia is still powerful. Not as powerful as it was even a decade ago, but it's still there. And they're still itching to carry out a sellout. Jay Galt says, it's much like domestic law. If you're the president, you can be a PDF file and the FBI will cover up for you. That's certainly true. Right. Let's see. What else we got? A lot of comment about the ACP. I can't really deal with that right now. Zain Mudassir says US isn't about to target Iran's supreme. Hope US isn't about to target Iran's supreme leader. Well, they've undoubtedly tried in the past, but the security around Ayatollah Khamenei is good enough that they can trick the US, Israeli, British alliance that would seek to target him. And even if they did, Khamenei has known this for a long time. I have no doubt that he has numerous potential successors waiting for the time that he does die, even if that's of natural causes, because he's quite an old man now. He's been around for a long time. But yeah, the Iranians will have their contingency plans in place. Right, okay. That's a Exodus says dialectical materialism is not for academics. Well, it's the lifeblood of the working classes revolutionary spirit. Every ml worth his salt must understand dialectical materialism. Well, everybody has to understand the basic principles of it. Like if a Marxist-Leninist organization is to survive, and as a Marxist-Leninist organization, it must be built on the highest theoretical level possible, incorporated, of course, with practical action. And you at least have to train your cadres to be able to effectively use the dialectical materialist mode of analysis in their day-to-day actions and to use it independently, which means you have to constantly educate your cadres to a very high level. So I somewhat agree with that. Right. Okay. So I'm going to draw things to a close for now. I will probably be returning to you tomorrow with another stream that will cover these events in more detail. Now, I will do that tomorrow, probably around about the same time. So 6 p.m. tomorrow, Sunday. Be sure to join me for that. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in tonight. So we have over 800 of you, almost 900 of you watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to share the content from the channel. Thanks to everybody who supports this project on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee and on Substack. I will then update all of those platforms when the next live stream is going to be, but it looks like it's going to be tomorrow at 6 p.m., barring anything dramatic happening even earlier. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in. And remember this, even though US imperialism appears to have won itself a victory here, the long-term decline is still in evidence. It is still unable to do the things that it did 30 years ago. Even if they do loot Venezuela, it will not arrest that decline. But more than anything else, go away with this. The fate of imperialism is tied ultimately to the struggle in our homelands. It is only in the homeland of imperialism that it can be defeated. We, that is all of us inside the imperialist countries, have the capability, if we get our level of organization correct, to actually bring down the imperialists inside their homelands, to end imperialism, be it American, British, French, German, Italian. We can end it once and for all if we organize ourselves correctly. But we should take from the events in Venezuela an awful warning that you had better be ready for the unlimited amount of violence and horror that the ruling class will always inflict on anybody who seeks to challenge its power. But it can be taken down. Feudalism passed away. Feudalism was destroyed by the rising bourgeoisie. The Russian Tsardom and the Russian bourgeoisie were swept away in 1917. Chinese landlordism and imperialist domination and the comprador bourgeoisie were swept away in 1949. This has happened before, and it can happen sooner than we think in the imperial core countries. So the lesson for us all is that we must educate ourselves, we must organize, and we must be sure that we are active in building our links to the masses, building up real communist parties in all the imperialist countries, because only that way will imperialism finally be conquered. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
Продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
С неба милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.